And the broadcast is live. Hello and welcome to Two Guys Talking Sales. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
And we're glad you're here. In this podcast, we'll tackle real sales issues, big and small for salespeople, selling situations, and sales leadership. We've collectively built successful careers around the problems and solutions used in B2B selling. From software to services to manufacturing and distribution, we have sold to and for many of the world's most recognized brands, as well as some you've never heard of. For roughly the next 15 minutes, we invite you into our world of experience where we'll take on one issue, dig into it so you might have a solution for when you encounter a similar situation in your career. Let's dive in. Sean, what are we talking about tonight?
Kevin, I think we should talk about why a company should assess their sales plan, the sales process, and sales methodologies. How about that?
Sounds good. Maybe we should start by saying, what is a sales plan, system, and methodology?
That makes sense to me. Well, go ahead. You want to start?
Yeah. So sales plan, let's kind of start top to bottom. Having a sales plan is more than just a quota, right? A sales plan is how you're going to market. It's a marketing and sales plan. It's not only who you're talking to, but why are you talking to them? What value are you bringing to the table?
It's kind of figuring out what your roadmap is. Are you going straight there? Are you going around the curves, right? But figuring out in advance, what are you going to do? How are you going to get there? What's your plan for success?
Right.
And, if you're really good, I think it's also how do you avoid? What's your plan for avoiding failure?
So let's put ourselves in a business owner's shoe or a sales leader's shoes. We'll walk a mile in their moccasins, so to speak. We think we've got a good sales organization already. Why should we assess what we perceive as a good organization?
I would challenge just about every company that thinks they have a good sales organization if they are a small company. Let me make my case here. You can defend it or you can go against it. My case is if you are a small company selling a product nationally, definitely internationally, let's just say nationally, just say United States. There's very few products that you can sell that anybody's buying a little bit of that people aren't going to buy at the $500 million to $1 billion worth at the national level. So if you're trying to sell your product or your service nationally, you probably are going after a $500 million to $1 billion or a $10 billion marketplace. So if you're still a small company, if you're a company under 20, under $30 million, you have a 0.1% market share. I would actually say that your organization isn't operating as good as it possibly could and needs to operate a little bit better in order to really grow fast and go after that market. I don't know. What do you think, Kevin?
I like that line of thought. I don't really see the need to go point counterpoint here because I think the value here is saying, well, okay, well, what have we seen in our careers that would support our answers? So even if we drop a couple of zeros off of our target markets or the market cap, right? Even if I'm a $20 million, $10 million, or even smaller company, the idea that I'm at my peak probably is a fallacy at best, right? We're not. Right. Nobody's at our peak. The moment we stop learning, the moment we stop trying, is the moment we start failing, right?
I agree.
So why have the practice? I'm a firm believer that if you aim for nothing, you're sure to hit it. Right? So you need to assess where you are, where you're going, and how to get there. Just really plan your work your plan. I think probably we've all had a mentor in our life who said, hey, plan your work your plan. If you don't have a goal, you're sure to hit it.
I agree. And that's the part of the reason that you should assess yourself, because you should say, well, how am I doing against best practices? How am I doing against the metrics of somebody that's really cooking on all cylinders, right? So that's why I think you should do assessments. I think you should go after markets and best practices that make sense for you and say, gee, what are the leaders doing in my market? What are the best companies doing? And then say, am I fulfilling those? Am I better than they are? Or do I have room for improvement? And what are those things that I could improve?
I would also I'd add on to that. This is a yes and, not a yes but kind of statement. So the yes and statement there is that the value we bring to market as salespeople is solely perceived by our clients. Like that's the measuring stick. So I think in most cases, if not all, our clients or prospective clients are looking for us to bring value to them So if we're not assessing how we're doing it or how we could do it better, we're actually decreasing our value to market. So I think every good ending begins with a well-planned beginning.
If you do stop improving, if you do stop trying to improve yourself on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, then you're actually going to start going back. The market doesn't stop. The market exists, and your competitors are going after that market. So if you're not trying to do better, they're eventually going to beat you.
Sure.
And we don't want to have that happen.
So let's take the other side of that coin. We kind of got here by saying, what about the person who thinks they're doing well already? What about the smaller business, the solopreneur of sorts, or the really small business that's emerging and they're a founder-led sales organization? My first point to why they should have a system or assess their sales organization is because they're going from selling themselves to sales management kind of at the same time. So they really need to assess not what are they doing, but what do they want others to do in their organization. It's really about building an organization as opposed to scaling or growing up in their business. Thoughts?
My first thought on that is, where do you want your company to go? I was just actually talking to a company owner just yesterday, and one of the questions I was asking her was, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? What do you envision to be your future? And if you envision your future to be that you're a manager, that other people are doing all the work, and you are and making them better as individuals, as a team, as an organization, but that's your job. You're the visionary in this organization. Why are you waiting to start that process? Why are you doing everything now? And then what you think is going to be some magical switch that you're going to flip, that, okay, now I get to be a manager, right? So I think that process of thinking about, where do I want to be, and then making my plan so that I'm actually moving forward to what that is an important part. And it goes back to being a sales plan and a marketing plan and a company plan.
If it's okay, I'd like to lean in on that a little bit. You said you talked to a business owner about that. We get faced with this a lot. When we have these discussions, it's not in theory. Like, we've moved off of theory into actual leadership for businesses. So what was the next step in her mind and your mind?
Yeah, so her next step was to actually truly understand what she wanted to be in 5 years. Her first answer was, well, I want to sell the company in 5 years. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Great goal. If that's your goal, what are you doing not only in sales to make sure that the company can grow, but now if you want to sell your company, are the other portions, the operations portions of your company, actually working right? So I think I scared her just a little bit, because I think she was counting up the months between now and 5 years and realized that she didn't have a lot of time to get all those things in place. And so by the end of the conversation, she was like, well, maybe 7 years. And which was an interesting realization. And it was just a matter of, what have you done to make yourself sellable? I did remind her, though, that anything that she is doing as the owner of the company, if she wants to step out of the company in 5 years, means that she needs to be able to delegate all of those things as soon as possible, because she needs 2 or 3 years of run rate with that management in place in order for that potential buyer to say, that makes sense, it's all worth that. You leave, that's all good, and I'm going to keep the rest of your team in place, and I'm going to make it better with more resources or whatever. She was a little scared about that because she didn't think that she had all that stuff lined up and ready to go. In just 1 or 2 more years, she was going to have to be there. So that was what was scaring her about going 7 years.
That's a great point to really hammer on. The idea that it takes infrastructure and planning to get to the sell number you want to get to. And for all the salespeople, regardless of your role or stage in your career, some of the best sales discovery calls don't end with, golly, you're exactly right, that's exactly what I need. Some of the best sales calls and our best values are when our prospects say, or our customers say, I've never thought about it like that, but you've got me thinking in a different direction, right? We've added value to that discussion. I had a similar discussion, but not the same. It didn't come out like that. It didn't come out with a owner saying, hey, I want to sell the company. It was really the thinking through of, what do they want to do? They said, I really don't want to sell the company, but I really don't want to do all of the business development work. And so the similar discussion, it's funny how similar our lives are when we're talking to businesses, because there's so many problems that are very, very similar, right? So all you
Yes.
salespeople out there listening, note that whatever you're talking to about your customers with, or your prospects, somebody else is probably having that same conversation. I digress. Anyway, so I was talking to my customer, and he says, I really don't want to do the business development anymore. I said, what does that really mean? Does that mean you want to get off a plane? Does that mean you want to not do as much prospecting or networking? He said, no, I don't want to do the initial discovery and demo anymore. I really want to focus on showing up as the voice of the founder to close the deal. We've worked the deal and the scope up to where it makes sense for the business. We made the business case. And I said, we know that's a really interesting problem, because a lot of people have that. And that will relate to why you assess your sales team, right? Why assess the sales organization? Because you want to take it to a place where, you're not quite sure what that end game looks like, but defining that is the whole reason for the assessment. We were able to, with that founder, we were able to arrive at an idea of how to build a sales organization around him being able to do the center plate work that he wants in 3 years.
Sure.
Business development teams, sales enablement teams, and demo teams, just to get to the point where the scope was finalized. He could go in and really drive home the value for the company.
And you and I both work for some fairly large companies, and even in our history, working for some Fortune 500 type companies, it was not unusual for a major customer to want to speak to executive staff, right? Maybe not the CEO, but probably the president, maybe the CFO, whatever, and have a conversation about the future of their company, because how does that align with the future of the customer's goals? So it's okay for a founder to say, look, I don't want to do all of the day-to-day sales activity, but that doesn't mean that founder should ever feel like he's going to be completely divorced from sales and never see a customer again. Because even in some $500 billion companies that you and I have both been part of, in my case, I was actually part of a $14 billion company. That CEO, he met with customers, right? So that's not an unusual thing. It's not about closing the deal. It's not about, even building the case to close the deal. In that case, it was about, this is where we're going as a company. How does that align with you, Mr. Customer? How do you want to go that direction as well? And let's talk about the future together. And those were the conversations. So I don't care if you're a $2 million company or a $2 billion company. That's the reality of life, that CEOs are always going to be front and center in the conversations to those key customers. The key customer just might be a little bit different in size and scope.
I've got a favorite phrase when it comes to the size of companies, and you can appreciate this. At the end of the day, you can either add or drop zeros. It's still dollars and product and value. If they don't see the value at $10,000, they're not going to see the same value at $10 million, right?
Exactly.
So if you drop a couple of zeros or add a couple of zeros, it's still about the value that you bring to market.
Exactly. So, in fact, you know what? The customer still has to get an ROI on that investment. And that investment that they make in your product has to be better than the investment they're going to get from the local banker or from any other, investment they're going to make in their company, right? So every company is looking at, what's my internal rate of return? They may not use those words, but they're still looking at, this investment, this purchase, this thing I'm buying is more valuable than the other thing I could be buying with those same dollars.
Well, hey, we're coming up right on 15 minutes here, and that's what we promised. So we're going to, overpromise and not underdeliver. We're going to overpromise and overdeliver, because that's what we do in sales.
There you go.
Quick hits here as we're wrapping up here. What is the biggest takeaway just from this conversation for you tonight?
So for me, it was, you need to benchmark yourself against those premier companies that you're competing with, and maybe you're not even competing with them, but premier companies that are in your orbit, that are right in your surroundings. And that's what a sales assessment is all about. What about you, Kevin? What do you think?
Completely agree with that. That's a really great takeaway. And for anybody out there listening, I hope they wrote that down. Know who's in your orbit. It's a great phrase. For me, it's, why have a system? It's so that you will have an idea of where you are in your journey. You need to be able to look ahead and behind and know that you have moved off the starting blocks towards a goal. If I had to summarize, it'd be the 3 C's. It'd be competition, complacency, and consistency. Competitions is what's coming at you. Complacency is what's up here. It's our gray matter. and our consistency is what our clients see, and that's what they want. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is that complacency in our sales lives.
Cool. That's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about our series that we're going to be doing a little bit, make sure people have some idea what's going on. So I'll start off. We're going to try to do these every week, about 15 minutes at a session, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. We're not going to hit a stopwatch against us. But every Tuesday is our goal. We'd like to do it right at the end of the day, so 4:30, 5 o'clock. So look for it on your LinkedIn feed about that time. You'll be able to watch it after the fact, obviously, as well. We're going to start with a bunch of questions that we would ask if we were assessing your company. So a bunch of questions that we have built in to our system that we're going to ask. We're just going to talk the value of those questions. But we really want your questions. So what questions do you have, Mr. Listener and Mrs. Listener? What questions do you have about sales in your company, about how to create a great sales organization? Drop them in the comments. Reach out to Kevin on LinkedIn. He's always on LinkedIn. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always here as well. We're connected to this podcast or this video, and just ask us some questions, and we'll bring them up in a future episode. We might tag you and say, hey, this was Joe that said this. This was Steve that said that. But we'd really like to hear from you as to what is important to you and what questions we can answer. Anything from you, Kevin?
Happy selling. Sales is a journey. It's okay to make a mistake, but it's not okay to not do anything.
I agree with that 100%. I agree with that. I'm going to actually end with my favorite quote from a sales trainer. It's from Zig Ziglar, and he was famous for saying, stop selling and start helping. So we'll talk about that in a future episode. I think we'll do a whole episode on that very topic, but that's one of my favorite quotes.
Hey, Sean, don't forget to tell them what's coming up next. Our next question on how to determine company sales objectives next week.
Right. Next Tuesday at about 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock. We'll have it scheduled out there, and we look forward to talking to you and hearing what Kevin and I have to say about that very topic. Thank you very much for your time. And once again, drop a comment. We'll catch the comments. Send us a note, and we'll catch those as well. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Sean.